What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Stats You Need to Know Week 6 edition. I am your host, Keith Flemming. Normally, I am joined by the amazing Kacey Kasem. Unfortunately, Kacey is a little under the weather, not feeling great, so she is going to sit this out. It's just going to be me solo. I got my boy Nico here with me. But we will go through like we do every week with these stats from the previous week. We feel like you should know. And let's start with some New York Jets stats. So, man, it's a tough start for the Jets. You're 0-5, the only team in the NFL without a win. So, not to rain on the parade, but Justin Fields, my guy, fantasy gold, but he is now 0-26 as a starter when the team he is facing has scored 21 points or more. That's not great. And this one's even more wild. The Jets defense, they started keeping the turnover statistic in 1933. Okay, people? 1933, they started keeping up with turnovers. Never in the history of the NFL until this year had a team gone 5 weeks without forcing a turnover until this New York Jets. And you wonder why they're 0-5. Probably a contributing factor, to say the least. Let's not be all negative on the Jets. I do want to leave that Mason Taylor, the tight end, has emerged. One of my favorite late darts early this season in fantasy football drafts after a very slow start to the season where he only saw 3 targets the first 2 weeks. He has now seen 6+ targets 3 straight games, and most importantly, over the last 2 games with Justin Fields as a starter, 26% target share week 4, 27% target share week 5, and that actually adds up with what was the main reason I liked him this summer. Justin Fields, for his career, has targeted tight ends right at 25%. So next up, we've got a little fun stuff from the Bucs-Seahawks wild game, and I do mean wild game, Sunday afternoon. 2 quarterbacks that were written off by their own teams, right? Like literally Baker and Darnold were left for dead. Well, on Sunday, these 2 guys, over 10 possessions, traded touchdowns on 9 of 10 of those possessions, and the 2 only combined for 6 incompletions during that span. A big reason SamDarnold was so good on Sunday and has been good all season is he has been just out of this world on pass attempts of 10+ air yards. He is now completing 86% of them. By far the highest total in the NFL. DrakeMaye ranks second, almost 20% less. But let's end this Bucs-Seahawks thing with Baker Mayfield, who I think should be the MVP at this moment in the NFL. He has been just unbelievable. He became the first quarterback in regular season history to eclipse 375 passing yards and have less than 5 incompletions. So these 2 QBs, latest example of situation, plays such a role. I'm glad they found a home. I'm glad they're thriving. Again, we are now 5 weeks into this NFL season, long enough to where there is plenty of data out there. Particularly now we're at a place where we can see defenses that say they excel versus the run and struggle with the pass, or vice versa. We call these, run-pass funnels, pass-run funnels. Let's first look at defenses that really struggle with the pass and are elite versus the run. So these would be defenses that you want to target. You want to play wide receivers, tight ends, pass-catching running backs against. Tampa Bay Bucks, they're 27th in EPA per dropback, meaning they're giving up a ton of yards in the passing game. They are first versus rush. So you want to avoid them with running backs. You want to play pass catch good. Patriots, very similar. 26 EPA per dropback, 4th versus rush. Las Vegas Raiders, they're 28th EPA per dropback, 7th versus rush. Seattle Seahawks, 22nd EPA per dropback, versus the pass, third EPA per rush. And then the Cleveland Browns, who's somebody we have highlighted, throughout this season as just being an elite run defense. They are 20th EPA versus the pass, second versus the run. And again, they are basically impossible to run against. On the other side, and these are teams that are very good versus the pass, struggle with the run. The Minnesota Vikings are first in EPA per dropback. No surprise with Brian Flores, who is just an all-world, schemer with blitzes and stuff. They're 25th versus the rush EPA. The Jags are third versus the pass, third versus the pass, 24th versus the rush. Chiefs, again, another team that is 10th versus the pass, 31st versus the run. And then the Buffalo Bills, two teams that we'll see if that's an issue later in the season, not being able to stop the run for these who have playoff aspirations. But the Bills are 11th versus the pass EPA, 28th versus the run. All right, next guy or next stat. DrakeMaye has officially arrived, right, Nico? I mean, DrakeMaye is here, and he's very good. He was incredible. And New England's win at Buffalo Sunday night, a place that nobody wins anymore. He completed 13 of 14 passes for 184 yards just in the second half. In the same game, he completed 8 of 10 passes, traveling 10-plus air yards. His completion percentage now is up to 68.8% on those throws. That is the second highest in the NFL. We mentioned Sam Darnold earlier being the first. This is Maye's fourth straight game where he has completed 70% of his passes and eclipsed 200 passing yards, making him the youngest quarterback in the history of the NFL to do so. And among all QBs, Maye, just like, what do you want? Fifth in air yards per attempt, second in completion percentage over expected, sixth in EPA per play, seventh in success rate. He's not only becoming one of the best quarterbacks in football, but one of the best quarterbacks to own in fantasy, as he's 10th in fantasy points per game, but he's 5th in expected fantasy points. And I think a big reason for that is, despite a guy that has the ability to run and ran a ton last year, he is not really doing that yet this year. And that could mean that we're seeing his floor, not his ceiling, which is scary things for people that are facing DrakeMaye. All right, next up, let's talk about RicoDowdle, who, boy, did he have a day on Sunday versus the Miami Dolphins. Now, granted, we may need to take that for a little bit of a grain of salt, as Dowdle was facing a Dolphins D that now is allowing 170-plus rushing yards per game at over 5.7 yards per carry, but still very impressive stuff what Dowdle did. His 234 total yards, the most by a single player this season. He forced 10 missed tackles, that tied for the most in a game this season. He had 4 runs of 15-plus yards, second most in a game this season, and his 157 yards after contact, most by any running back this season. I think that RicoDowdle has earned more snaps, because when you consider that Chuba Hubbard has 53 rush attempts this season, 0 explosive runs, and he hasn't forced a missed tackle on any of those 53 attempts, I think it's safe to assume that even if Hubbard returns this week, Dowdle has earned a place in this rushing attack. All right, let's talk the Giants' target share, because we now have a decent sample size since they lost Malik Nabers for the season. And Theo Johnson and Wan'Dale Robinson are tied first with 21.6%. Cam Skattebo is third at 17.6%. And Darius Slayton is fourth at 15.7%. I think Johnson and Skattebo's usage with Dart is legit. We've obviously talked about Skattebo and just the volume he's getting week in and week out. But, Johnson, he caught over 3 games with Russell Wilson, 6 passes on 10 targets, and just 2 starts with Dart. He's already seen 12 targets, caught 9 passes, 50 yards, 3 scores. And then the significant thing is that 20% target share. There's only 3 tight ends in the entire NFL who have a higher target share than 20%. So I don't think this is a flash in a pan. This is actually something that we could see continuing moving forward. Let's talk about another tight end who I'm very happy to see is alive from the dead, and that's DavidNjoku, who was somebody that I was very high on this summer. He had a just unbelievable track record when he plays with Joe Flacco, but ironically, he got off to a really bad start, and it looks like maybe Dillon Gabriel becoming the quarterback for the Cleveland Browns has unlocked DavidNjoku, because Dillon Gabriel in his first start for the Browns, week 5, he targeted tight ends on almost 40% of his pass attempts. For comparison, Njoku and Harold Fannin had combined for just 26.8% of the pass attempts for Joe Flacco the first week. No surprise with that extra volume of tight ends. Njoku saw season highs in targets, receptions, yards, fantasy points, scored his first touchdown of the season. And I think the fact that Cleveland's head coach went out of his way to praise Njoku's run blocking in this game, where again, he had his by far best game when it comes to the pass, it's a good sign he's going to be on the field a great deal moving forward. Again, he played 67 of 70 snaps, by far his highest percentage of this season. All right, next up, we need to talk not a stat correction, but a stat clarification from last week, and then also give a stat about our man, Ja'Cory Merritt, a.k.a. our buddy Bill. Me and Casey, we don't want to be considered fake news, right? And last week, we did discuss what a mess the Commanders' backfield has been since Austin Eckler was lost for the season. And it has been a mess. I mean, just if you do not remember, Chris Rodriguez and Jeremy McNichols both have more rushing yards heading into last week than our boy, Ja'Cory Bill Merritt. If I'd have dug just a little further, I think I would have noticed the Commanders were really only using Bill when the game was competitive. And almost all of Rodriguez's volume was when they were up or down by significant scores. And we know in the 2 weeks that Jayden Daniels didn't play, that was the case. They blew out Vegas, 3 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, they trailed throughout to Atlanta, making, I think, the Commanders' rushing yard totals misleading. So guess what happens when Jayden Daniels returns last week? Who's the focal point and has their big breakout day? Our buddy Bill. He had 150 total yards and 2 scores. More importantly, 111 yards on just 14 carries. And a week after saying, boy, the Commanders' backfield is a mess, I wouldn't be, wanting to own Bill Merritt. I have to eat some crow on this, because you see his monster day, clarifying why the rushing totals were the way they were. And now through 5 weeks, he leads all running backs in yards after contact at 4.4 yards per attempt. And he's scoring the most fantasy points per touch among running backs at 1.26 points per touch. Jonathan Taylor ranks second at 1.10. And think about the season Jonathan Taylor's having. There is a chance that Bill Merritt could end up being like one of the steals of fantasy football drafts. I hope nobody dropped them because I'm an idiot. Let's talk some top 10 wide receivers in terms of targets per route run. No surprise, the top of that list, Puka 37%, JSN 33%. That's duh, with how their seasons are going. But there are a few other names in that top 10 that I think it's worth at least mentioning. First off, Stefon Diggs, 28%. He's third. We've already spoke about on this show how great May's playing. And Diggs, despite being in a new system and coming off a season-ending injury last year, for him to already be seeing that kind of target share per route run, leading his team in targets, it's not a surprise, right, that he's coming off back-to-back 10-plus target games, back-to-back monster fantasy performances. All right, next up, tied fourth, Chris Olave at 27%. Olave is now officially a PPR scam at this point. We've talked about this as well. Somehow Spencer Rattler has turned him into Wan'Dale Robinson. Olave has caught 6+ passes in 4 or 5 games, but he's yet to eclipse 60 receiving yards in a game. Olave is a very safe floor guy, much like Wan'Dale Robinson when he's on the field a lot, right? Like he's probably going to get you 10 points every week in PPR formats, but until something changes, that's about it. And then let's talk about two guys that are tied 10th. Deebo Samuel, 25%, another person that we spoke about a few weeks ago, the fact that the Commanders were lining him up in the slot over 70% of the time. That is a huge win for Deebo Samuel fantasy owners because he's been so efficient for his career when he lines up in the slot. And we see that, especially in the games he's played with Jayden Daniels. He's now played 3 games with Daniels. In those 3 games, 29 targets, 22 receptions, 245 yards, 2 scores. I expect Deebo to be a top 10 wide receiver if he stays healthy rest of the season. And then a really surprising one, Josh Downs, 25%. And the reason that's surprising is Downs really never plays or is on the field in just 2 wide receiver sets. He's only on the field in 3 receiver sets. So for him to be seeing such a huge target share per route run, I don't know if that means it's going to translate to him having a bunch of big fantasy days in the weeks to come, or if it's just kind of an anomaly. We will find out, over the next few weeks. All right, if you've been watching the show since week 1, it seems like every week I have to mention Puka Nacua, who is the best wide receiver in fantasy and in football, and he continues to show it once again, as last week, despite their shocking loss at home to the Niners on Thursday night, he caught 10 more passes and scored a touchdown for the second straight week. He finished top 6 at wide receiver for fantasy for the week, something he's now done all 5 weeks this season. No other wide receiver in football has finished top 6 more than twice this season for the week. So Puka is in a class by himself, and thanks to Fantasy Points data, they now are tracking a wins above replacement for fantasy football. No surprise, Puka Nacua ranks first, CMC second. They are the only 2 players who are basically already accounted for 2 wins above replacement. And remember, we're just 5 weeks into the season, so it shows how important they've been. Another technically Puka stat, but it's really about EmekaEgbuka. Egbuka continues to be just a revelation. He now has 102.4 fantasy points in PPR formats through his first 5 games. That is the 3rd most for a wide receiver ever. He has surpassed Malik Nabers at 99.7 points at 4th, Jamar Chase at 98.4 points at 5th. The only guys who have had a better start in terms of fantasy points in PPR formats through their first 5 games, Randy Moss, 104.7 points all the way back in 1998. And our guy Puka Nacua, who just was unbelievable for his first, I think 6-7 weeks just 3 years ago, as he scored 115 points, ranking as, again, the top wide receiver ever through his first 5 games in PPR points. And then the final stat this week, this is not really something that has, I don't think, any relevance for fantasy other than the fact that just Javonte Williams has been incredible. But I just thought this was wild and I had to share it. This came from the Cowboys PR team. Javonte Williams rushed for 108 yards in the first half versus the New York Jets, while Ryan Florney pulled in 104 receiving yards as well in the same first half against the Jets. Going back to 1978, there had never been a game in which the Cowboys had both a 100-yard rusher and a 100-yard receiver in the same half of a game. And I want you to think about this. This is a team that had, all the way back in the 70s, 80s, Tony Dorsett, Drew Pearson. In the 90s, obviously, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, and just, the 2010s, Zeke Elliott and Des Bryant. And Javonte Williams and Ryan Florney are the first 2 Cowboys, runner and pass catcher, to accomplish that feat of 100 yards, both rushing and receiving, in the same half. So just wild stuff, man. Again, missed Kacey this week. Hate that she's not here. I hope I didn't bore you guys talking the entire 20 minutes of the show. But we will be back next week with the 12 must-know stats for fantasy football for week 7. I hope you guys have a great, great week, whether it be for your fantasy football lineups, your DFS plays, your prop bets. And be sure to check out all the great stuff on fantasy6pack.net. Nico, as you can see, fell asleep. I bored him. But we will see you guys next week.